My background is I'm a former BIA Kelsey analyst, and these days I'm an independent consultant. I work with Alsma to help run this event, or at least this portion of it. But majority of my time is spent with these days with the local search association, where I serve as an advisor. And what I do, for the most part, is I help them fulfill thought leadership white papers. And I'm also helping run a research project called the Tech Adoption Index. And those two dovetail nicely with what I'm going to talk about today, which is a paper commissioned by Camilyo, one of our sponsors here, called the Small Business Operating System, the Next Wave Opportunity in Local ? So the idea behind this paper dovetails very nicely with the research I'm doing on small business adoption of cloud tools to run every aspect of their business, both front office and back office. So what I'm going to share with you is some of the findings from the paper, as well as some of the findings from our tech adoption research, which I think is very relevant for a lot of the conversations we've been having thus far. So, getting right into it. And by the way, if you're interested in reading the paper once I'm done with this, let me know, and we'll make sure you get a copy of it, or send me an email, or contact the folks at Camilyo. So what I want to do to set this up is this notion of moving small businesses to the cloud to help run their businesses more effectively. It's driven from some demonstrable pain points that small businesses are feeling. One of which is that, and this is probably universally true, may vary depending on where you are somewhat, but I think it's a fairly universal finding, is that small businesses spend a lot of time doing things that they didn't get into business to do. Now this data point is from Intuit, from a study that they did, where they found that the typical small business spends about a third of their day doing what they actually are in business to do, whether it's cutting hair or filling teeth or whatever it is, practicing law. The rest of that time is spent invoicing customers. It's spent hiring and training staff. It's spent handling payroll and taxes. It's spent managing your supply chain. All the things that are necessary to run a business, but the things that small businesses wish they spent less time doing, and that they could get back to doing more of what they got into business to do in the first place. So there's this notion of, please help me do things more efficiently, help me get back some of this time, either to spend on my own or to spend doing what I love. Another issue that's driving this notion of the small business operating system is that there's a lot of noise and confusion out there with the number of apps that small businesses have access to, any one of which may make that one task more efficient, but the collective process of learning all these apps, acquiring them, putting your data up on them becomes a cumbersome and almost prohibitive inconvenience if you look at it across the entire operation of the business. So the idea is, can that be done more efficiently in a single solution in some form? Another thing that we're looking at that sort of drove our thinking in trying to understand that we need to measure this shift to the cloud was that these are U.S. demographics. I think in some markets it's probably even more severe in terms of aging population. But in the States at least, 10,000 baby boomers, those are people who are just slightly older than I am, who sort of born in the immediate post-war period, who are retiring or reaching retirement age. They aren't necessarily retiring. But as the statistics sort of illustrates a situation where you have business owners reaching sort of that retirement age, suggests that there's a new generation of business owners coming in who are going to operate their businesses much differently. They're not going to, they're going to use a cloud-based accounting tool or Amazon to source their goods and services. They'll use Gusto to handle payroll. They may have a Square payment system. They're going to have an app-based approach to running their business, much more so than perhaps the generation that's reaching retirement age. So you put all that together and it starts to paint a picture of a changing market in terms of how businesses operate their business. So from the data that we've, which I'm about to show you some of the data from our Tech Adoption Index, what we're seeing is that businesses, or small businesses that are adopting cloud tools have a certain set of characteristics which generally point to where the energy in the market is going. These tend to be younger businesses, not business owners per se, but the business itself, less than 10 years old. 72% of those who are adopting cloud tools to run their business are less than 10 years old. Tend to be a little bit bigger on the 10 employees and up. But the most important one is at the bottom. They tend to allocate more of their spend to their media spend to digital, as opposed to print media, direct mail, yellow pages, print yellow pages, and so on. So they're more already engaged with digital. What isn't here is also they tend to have more a more rich media portfolio. They may use 7 or 8 different media choices versus 1 or 2 for businesses that are less likely to be shifting how they run their business with technology. So there's a clear sort of demographic that's shifting to the cloud. So what I'm going to show you now is we ran a survey in May, and we're actually working on the reviving the instrument for another wave next month, or starting next week actually, where we surveyed 1,000 businesses across 5 verticals: home services, professional services, automotive, retail, and personal services. So these are sort of macro verticals that tend to map with the customer base of traditional publishers. And we asked them across several different business areas or elements of running their business, managing their supply chain, managing their customer data, managing their human capital, HR, doing payroll, hiring and firing, training, et cetera, advertising and promotion. We looked at all of these different aspects of the business and asked, what kind of tools are you using to handle these things? Are you using your traditional supplier? Are you using a cloud-based supply, which is largely Amazon? Are you using an online CRM, or are you still doing things through a spreadsheet? Do you have using a spreadsheet, or are you using cloud-based accounting tools, et cetera? And we asked, across all those areas what people are adopting. You can see that, it's about a quarter at most, 10% at the least, depending on the category. But it's already a meaningful number of small businesses that have shifted. And again, if you sort of look at who is doing the shifting, those younger, more digitally focused businesses are at a much higher level. And then we asked, okay, if you haven't already shifted, what are you planning to do in the next couple of years? So you can see, again, those, if they haven't shifted already, 27% say they will move their customer relationship management to the cloud. They will move finance and operations to the cloud at 17%, payroll and human resources, and on and on. So if you add those together, it starts to look like a fairly meaningful shift to using cloud-based technology to run their business. So we're starting to see an emerging trend here. And then what we asked is, okay, if you're planning to shift to the cloud for any of these aspects of your business, what timeline are you looking at? And we asked, is it in the next few months? Is it within the next year, the next couple of years, more than 2 years? And we thought it was pretty interesting that the companies tend to be looking to do this fairly soon, within the next year. The vast majority say, no, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it in the next year, rather than we'll get to it eventually. The we'll get to it eventually is essentially that orange line, more than 2 years. That means I interpret that as, yeah, we're going to change, but not really, because we're going to do it in 2 years or more. That's not a serious answer. I think if it's within a year or less, that's a serious answer. And so we interpret that as a fairly strong yes, if they say they're going to do it within a year. So that kind of starts to paint a picture of the general shift that's going on. I'm going to show you an example from a specific business function for payroll services. So basically that's handling, cutting the checks for your employees. A lot of companies use a traditional service like Paychecks or something like that. ADP in the States, I'm sure there's different brands in different markets. There's tools like Gusto that are disrupting those traditional players. So we're asking, why are you making that shift? What's motivating you? And what we found interesting was to sort of get back to my original slide with the 36% want, some of their time back, or at least they're not spending enough time on what they really want to do. Saves time, 47%. Easier to use, 34%. More capability, 34%. Less expensive never really rises to the top for any of these. In general, cost is a factor, but it's not the driving factor, which I found very interesting. It's about make my business more effective, more efficient, give me some time back. That's the motivation for the switch. And what we're hoping to do over several waves of research is find out if that promise is being fulfilled. But that's certainly the pitch that they're buying is, give me my life back, give me some of my life back as a business. Okay, now there's sort of some good news and some bad news in this data for certainly for media companies coming from a traditional media background trying to make a shift to a new way of doing business, a new go-to-market approach, a new set of products and services. Potentially good news is that there is pretty demonstrable demand for a solution that makes sense of it all for a small business. So instead of, if you can make it easy for me to shift my business to the cloud, we're listening. At least 60% or so are interested in the idea of an all-in-one solution or to somehow simplify or aggregate versus going off and buying an app for this, an app for that, and an app for the other thing, and not really having any integration among those and having to individually learn each of them, individually pay for each of them, et cetera, et cetera. If you can sort of bring it all together in one solution, there's some meaningful interest in that idea. Now, potentially the bad news is that, I apologize for the font change, but I think you can all see this, that when we asked, okay, if you're going to buy these tools, or actually what we asked is, if you're going to buy a service that is outside the sort of core function of that service. So, for example, if you want to buy a payment solution, are you going to be interested in buying that from a software company that's already providing you, say, an unrelated service? Or are you going to be interested in buying that from the media company you've been doing business with all these years? And pretty solid majority were more interested in giving the software company the business. And I think this is not, the end of the story, I don't believe, at all. But I think what it does say is that there is a brand perception challenge, and I think that's not news to anybody who's been in the Yellow Pages industry, is that, that challenge existed when you tried to sell websites to small businesses, when you try to sell them search marketing. It's, why am I buying this from you? It's just another time, this is another example of you're going to have to overcome that. So there's resistance to the idea of sort of stretching beyond your brand to sell those services. So there's a few ways to do that. One is to go to market, with a whole new brand and a whole new, basically a whole new presence, and we'll see an example of that in a few minutes. And there's also big challenges with how these things tend to be sold. So there's a lot of heavy lifting on the transformation side in order to make this shift. But I think as the data we're gathering shows that there's a clear opportunity. And also, where every time there's an opportunity, there's a threat that somebody else will take advantage of that opportunity and leave you wishing you had. So this is a chart from the paper that I wrote working with Camilyo. Sort of a scheme of what a visual of what we're talking about when we describe the small business operating system. So, and it really is sort of every element of the business, from acquiring customers and then converting those customers into sales, figuring out how to retain those customers, all the sort of revenue-facing functions that a business deals with, as well as all the sort of the back office functions that a company has to deal with, or a small business has to deal with: supplies, workforce, capital. All those things potentially could tie together through a CRM system. And the point I'll make here is, and I've had a lot of conversations with people, and they've said, small businesses, they don't even know what a CRM is. Well, why are you talking about CRM? And I guess my point to that would be, I don't think you're necessarily walking through the door of a small business and saying, would you like to buy a CRM? I think what you're doing is you're describing the benefits of tying all these things together. I don't think the term CRM needs to even come up. It's probably more of an internal discussion, but it certainly is an organizing principle for this SMB operating system. So what I'm going to, actually it's case study, it should have been plural. I'm a writer, I should have gotten that right. But so I'm going to walk through a couple of examples from the paper and then one that I've just added kind of last minute to sort of show you the bigger picture of how if you just sit there and do nothing, others are already in the process of sort of building this SMB operating system by default. I would argue, I don't include this in this presentation, but from that conversation about WeChat yesterday, I would sort of include that as maybe an example by default of creating that small business operating system through messaging and mobile payments, sort of how that sort of just creates more and more adjacencies, and suddenly you're doing everything for that small business through one platform, WeChat. So I'm going to talk about MySuite, which is Excelero. They're a company, a digital agency essentially, based in Italy. We'll go through these fairly quickly. And what they've built, again, is something very similar to what we just described. It's basically, they were originally selling sort of the usual suspects, digital products. They decided that what they really needed to do was be more about, less about driving the leads and helping the business acquire one customer one time, and instead of helping that business capture those customers, capture that customer information, and remarket to those customers to build value over the lifetime of that customer and create less churn, higher yield for the customer, et cetera, create a deeper value for that small business. So it's sort of integrating both the front office and the back office. And it's called MySuite. And again, it sort of has this notion of CRM at the center. The point, I'm not one who really likes to talk about these charts very much, but what I'm going to point out is the key thing on the left where it says advisory. And this is a common theme for all of these, I think, early stage services that are going to market with these platform solutions for small businesses, is that there's a heavy service component. And for MySuite, they call it the advisory component. It's where there's a service element after the onboarding and after they get engaged with the platform. There's regular touches with that customer to help them understand how to extract more value out of the platform, how to message customers at the right time, to help them convert at a higher level. It's just sort of an ongoing learning process that's guided to help those customers engage more with the platform, get more value out of it. So that's going to be a theme here, is that at least in the early stages, it's a heavily service-oriented business. It's not simply, here's a platform, jump on board, pull in your data, and go to work. There has to be a very heavy service engagement with this, or else it's probably not going to work, at least early on. My view is over time, with advances in AI, machine learning, other things, these will become more and more automated, but I don't think we're there yet. I think, at least initially, this is a service-oriented business. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Thrive, which is DexYP is going to market with something called Thrive, which again is a platform solution pretty much based on, with a CRM at its core, but they're not walking into small businesses and say, do you want to buy a CRM? It's, do you want to, not just bring leads in, but do you want to longer, better value with your customers? Do you have a platform that makes it all simple for you? So the point I want to make about Thrive initially is that they changed the name to Thrive because they knew that they couldn't walk through the door and start talking about platforms and software as a Yellow Pages company. They really need to do this as a new brand. So to get back to that slide where it said only about a third want to buy software from a media partner, Thrive is part of the answer to that challenge, which is create a different go-to-market approach. And coming at them with the brand Thrive, if you see what Dex is doing, the name Thrive is appearing everywhere. The name Dex is not appearing anywhere that I can see anymore. So they're using a new brand to sort of get past that challenge. Remains to be seen whether they're successful with that, but so initially they've already sold, I think, 30 to 40,000 to their existing customer base. They're beginning to go to market outside of their customer base. So the early results are positive. And so just a description of what they have. Again, these all things all start to look a bit familiar. It's payments, it's contact management, remarketing to your customer base, booking, listings management, all in one solution. Again, these things tend to have a commonality. And I will add that Thrive has, again, a heavy service component. There's monthly touch points with with their customers, except for those at a very low level. There's an example of some of their pricing levels. Again, there's like a DIY version that's much less expensive than this, where there is no service, but essentially everything else includes a service component. The idea is to help them learn the platform, engage with their customers more effectively. I think they feel like it's a necessary investment in order to make this work. And finally, I'm going to talk about Square. Now, I just threw this in at the last minute because I think it's important to see an example of a company that comes at this not from a media perspective, but from an app perspective, and how they've extended from their original position as the little device, the dongle that you plug into your cell phone so you can take credit cards at the farmer's market, to basically what's becoming a platform for small businesses based on coming up from a very humble origins and point of sale. So now Square has gone from that to that, and now it's becoming all of these things. So if you look at what Square is doing, now they're into payroll and invoicing, and Square is a bank. Small businesses are getting money from Square. It has a CRM and booking and scheduling, integrates other apps into a marketplace, and so Square is sort of by default becoming this operating system as well. So it's happening whether you're going to engage with this or not. This is already happening with companies like Square, and then if you look in some verticals, companies like Upserve working in the restaurant vertical, starting out with helping restaurants manage their scheduling of their staff, and now they're basically a full business operating system for restaurants. So these things are happening either by vertical or from a horizontal but specific application like Square. So kind of to wrap up real quick, this whole SMB operating system approach, basically all-in-one approach, it solves a real need in making sense of all these random tools that otherwise would be sort of difficult for them to manage as a small business, certainly no integration among them. You can become indispensable if this is executed properly and create some scale opportunities. So there's clear benefits to doing this both for the small business and for the person the company bringing this to market. Also, there's some limitations and some challenges. This idea of good enough versus best in breed. I mean, if you're all-in-one, are you providing excellence across the board for all these solutions? That's a valid question. You could argue that full functionality is not necessarily required for all of these in order to be an effective tool for small businesses. So good enough may be good enough, but there are going to be some small businesses that just I want the best this, that, and the other, and I'll deal with managing them myself. So yeah, again, sort of this idea of integrating into a single platform is not an easy challenge. I would emphasize the sales challenge. Selling platforms versus selling media is a very big leap. There's a lot of challenges in terms of how these things are sold. Software is typically sold inbound, not necessarily premise salespeople knocking on doors. I think if you look at a company like Dex, they're probably going to use their premise channel to sell to their existing customers, but once you stretch outside of their core customer base, they have to really sell more like a software company, which means resellers, means inbound. It's just a completely different animal. And again, to the point, can you stretch your brand from yellow to SaaS or to software? Big, big challenge. I believe it can be done, but it is not it's not turning a rubber ducky around in the bathtub, it's turning a battleship around in a canal. But that's the kind of transformation challenge this industry is used to. This is just another one. So that's really all I had. I did want to mention one thing real quick commercial. I'm organizing a conference in December 7th in San Francisco around this whole notion of small business cloud adoption. There's a special code here if you guys go to the LSA website, and if you're interested in attending, use that code for a discount. If you want to find out more about it, ask me. And that's it. So, Kimberly, are you ready? Good to go? All right. Thank you. Any quick questions? Otherwise, we're going to go out to Kimberly.